Hello, my name is Nezumi, and I'll be showing you how I made the katana for my Hyakkimaru cosplay from Dororo. I started with a plastic katana I bought as a base, and I started removing the molded on handle wrapping and handguard. Instead of making the sword from scratch, I decided to use a pre-bought one to save time since it was a minor detail on the overall cosplay, and he rarely ever even opens the sword anyways. Then I dremeled off the rest of the details. Then I remember I owned a belt sander and I sanded the rest of it off on that, which saved a bunch of time, but if you only have a Dremel then that works too. For the new handguard, I made a pattern out of paper and transferred it to 5mm craft foam and traced it and cut it out with a sharp knife. I also traced out my design onto it as well. And I burned in the design using a soldering iron. Make sure you work in a well-ventilated room and wear a respirator when working around burning foam. Then I heated up 2 pieces of Worbla and sandwiched the foam in between it. If you are following this tutorial for your own sword, then you can skip this step, but I did this in case the sword got bumped so the Worbla could reinforce the foam. And overall add more rigidity to the foam, especially since it's sitting on my hip all day at the con. Also, I use a wooden sculpting tool to push the Worbla into the design. And if you get any air bubbles, just poke them with a sewing needle and push the air out and flatten the Worbla with your hands or the table. Finally, you can cut the excess off as close as you can without opening up the Worbla sandwich. It works best when it's still hot, and I like to use an old pair of metal fabric shears that I only use for Worbla now. If the edge isn't perfect or it did open up a little, then I like to roll it or flatten it on the table to smooth it and get a clean edge. I also cut out the hole in the center and put it on the sword while it was still hot and took it back off to make sure it would fit when cooled. And I made sure it was completely flat before letting it cool down completely. And off screen I could glue it on with super glue. Then I filled in all the gaps with quick seal. You can apply the quick seal with your finger and blend it out using some water. I also did this to the handle, which I later realized was necessary because I covered it in fabric wraps. Then I primed everything in a few coats of watered down wood glue. Off screen I also taped off the blade and sheath since I wanted to leave it how it was. Off screen I also added some detail with 2 layers of Worbla on the sheath that was on his sword, which you can see here. And then I give everything 2 layers of black paint. And then I dry brushed on a few different light grays. Once I was happy with the paint job, I added a satin spray varnish to it. For the fabric wraps, I cut strips of duck canvas and pulled some strings off the edges to purposely fray the edges, and I watered down brown and tan acrylic paint and painted it on, focusing the brown along the edges and the tan in the center and blending it in. I ended up having to cut my strips in half because they were too wide, so I made sure to glue them on with the brown overlapping. And once those dried, I could hot glue them onto the handle. And I wrapped it in 2 layers to bulk up the handle. For the detail on the end of the handle, I cut 2 super thin strips of fabric and glued it down, and rolled the ends up on both sides to mimic some type of small knot or wrapping that's on his sword. And here's how the finished handle looks up close. Off screen, I mixed up some watered down reddish brown acrylic paint and dyed some rope for the sheath. And using a picture I found online, I taught myself how to tie a Japanese square knot. I did a square knot right against the sheath and then one a little further down, and then each end of the rope ended in a very basic knot as well. And here's how the finished sword looks. And here's how it looks with the rest of the costume. Thank you so much for watching, and please check out my other videos for how I made the rest of the costume. And please like and subscribe and follow for more.